Hey guys, I hope you're all doing well. This is Cassidy again, and today we're going to read part 5 of The Inheritance Games by Jennifer Lynn Barnes. Chapter 31. It really was a bowling alley. In my house. There was a bowling alley in my house. As promised, there were only 4 lanes, but otherwise, it had everything you'd expect a bowling alley to have. There was a ball return, pin setters on each lane, a touchscreen to set up the games, and 55-inch monitors overhead to keep track of the score. Emblazoned on all of it, the balls, the lanes, the touchscreen, the monitors, was an elaborate letter H. I tried not to take that as a reminder that none of this was supposed to be mine. Instead, I focused on choosing the right ball, the right shoes, because there were at least 40 pairs of bowling shoes on a rack to the side. Who needs 40 pairs of bowling shoes? Tapping my finger against the touchscreen, I entered my initials, AKG. An instant later, a welcome flashed across the monitor. Welcome to the Hawthorne House, Avery Kylie Grams. The hairs on my arm stood up. I doubted programming my name into this unit had been a top priority for anyone the last couple days. And that means... Was it you? I asked out loud, addressing the words to Tobias Hawthorne. Had one of his last acts on Earth been to program this welcome? I pushed down the urge to shiver. At the end of the second lane, pins were waiting for me. I picked up my ball, 10 pounds with a silver H on a dark green background. Back home, the bowling alley had offered a 99-cent bowling once a month. My mom and I had gone every time. I wished that she were here, and then I wondered, if she were alive, would I even be here? I wasn't a Hawthorne. Unless the old man had chosen me randomly, unless I had somehow done something to catch his attention, his decision to leave everything to me had to have something to do with her. If she'd been alive, would you have left the money to her? At least this time I wasn't addressing Tobias Hawthorne out loud. Were you sorry for her? Did you do something with her? Not do something to her or for her? I have a secret, I heard my mom saying. I threw the ball harder than I should have and only hit 2 points. I only hit 2 pins. If my mom had been here, she would have mocked me. I concentrated then and bowled. 5 games later, I was covered in sweat, and my arms were aching. I felt good. Good enough to venture back out into the house and go hunt for the gym. Athletic complex might have been a more accurate term. I stepped out into the basketball court. The room jutted out in an L shape, with 2 weight benches and a half-dozen workout machines in the smaller part of the L. There was a door on the back wall. As long as I'm playing Dorothy in Oz. I opened it and found myself looking up. A rock-climbing wall stretched out 2 stories overhead. A figure grappled with a near-vertical section on the wall, at least 20 feet up with no harness. Jameson. He must have sensed me somehow. Ever climbed one of these before? He called down. Again, I thought of Grayson's warning, but this time I told myself that I didn't give a damn about what Grayson Hawthorne had to say to me. I walked over to the climbing wall, planted my feet at the base, and did a quick survey of the available hand and footholds. First time, I called back to Jameson, reaching for one of them, but I'm a quick learner. I made it until my feet were about 6 feet off the ground before the wall jutted out in an angle designed to make things difficult. I braced one leg against a foothold and the other against the wall, and stretched my right arm for a handhold of a fraction of an inch too far away. I missed. From the ledge above me, a hand snaked down and grabbed mine. Jameson smirked as I dangled midair. You can drop, he told me, or I can try to swing you up. Do it. I bit back the words. Warren was nowhere to be seen, and the last thing I needed to do, alone with the Hawthorne, was go higher. Instead, I let go of his arm and braced for impact. After I landed, I stood, watching Jameson work his way back up the wall, muscles tensing against the thin white t-shirt. This is a bad idea, I told myself, my heart thumping. Jameson Winchester Hawthorne is a very bad idea. I hadn't even realized I remembered his middle name until it popped into my head. A last name, just like his first. Stop looking at him. Stop thinking about him. The next year's going to be complicated enough without complications. Feeling suddenly like I was being watched, I turned to the door and found Grayson staring straight at me. His light eyes were narrowed and focused. You don't scare me, Grayson Hawthorne. I forced myself to turn away from him, swallowed, and called up to Jameson. I'll see you in the library. Chapter 32. The library was empty when I stepped through the door at 9:15, but it didn't stay empty for long. Jameson arrived at 9:30, and Grayson let himself in at 9:30. "What are we doing today?" Grayson asked his brother. "We?" Jameson shot back. Grayson meticulously cuffed his sleeves. He changed after his workout, donning a stiff-collared shirt like armor. Can't an older brother spend time with his younger brother and an interloper of dubious intentions without getting the third degree? He doesn't trust me with you, I translated. He says I'm such a delicate flower. Jameson's tone was light, but his eyes told a different story. In need of protection and constant supervision. Grayson was undaunted by sarcasm. "So it would seem," he smiled, his expression razor sharp. "What are we doing today?" he repeated. I had no idea what it was about his voice that made him so impossible to ignore. "Eris and I," Jameson replied pointedly, "are following a hunch, doubtlessly wasting sinful amounts of time on what I'm sure you would consider to be nonsensical flapdoodle." Jameson frowned. "I don't talk like that." Jameson let the arch of an eyebrow speak for itself. Grayson narrowed his eyes. "And what hunch are the two of you following?" When it became clear that Jameson wasn't going to answer, I did. Not because I owed Grayson Hawthorne a single damn thing. Because part of any winning strategy, long term, was knowing when to play your opponent's expectations and when to subvert them. Grayson Hawthorne expected nothing from me. Nothing good. "We think your grandfather's letter to Jameson included a clue about what he was thinking." "What he was thinking," Grayson repeated, sharp eyes making a casual study of my features. "And why he left everything to you." Jameson leaned back against the doorframe. "It sounds like him, doesn't it?" he asked Grayson. "One last game?" I could hear in Jameson's tone that he wanted Grayson to say yes. He wanted his brother's agreement, or possibly approval. Maybe some part of him wanted for them to do this together. For a split second, I saw a spark of something in Grayson's eyes, too, but it was extinguished so quickly I was left wondering if the light in my mind were playing tricks on me. "Frankly, Jamie," Grayson commented, "I'm surprised you still feel you know the old man at all." "I'm just full of surprises." Jameson must have caught himself wanting something from Grayson, because the light in his own eyes went out, too. "And you can leave any time, Gray." "I think not," Grayson replied. "Better the devil you know than the devil you don't." He let those words hang in the air. Or is it? Power corrupts. Absolute power corrupts absolutely. My eyes darted toward Jameson, who stood eerily, absolutely still. "He left you the same message," Jameson said finally, pushing off the doorway and pacing the room. "The same clue." "Not a clue," Grayson countered. "An indication that he wasn't in his right mind." Jameson whirled on him. "You don't believe that." He assessed Grayson's expression, his posture. "But a judge might." Jameson shot me a look. "He'll use his letter against you if he can." He might have given his letter to Zara and Constantine already, I thought. But according to what Elisa had told me, that wouldn't matter. "There was another will before this one," I said, looking from brother to brother. "Your grandfather left your family even less in that one." "He didn't disinherit you for me." I was looking at Grayson when I said those words. "He disinherited the entire Hawthorne family before you were even born, right after your uncle died." Jameson stopped pacing. "You're lying." His entire body was tense. Grayson held my gaze. "She's not." If I'd been guessing how this would go, I would have guessed that Jameson would believe me and Grayson would be the skeptic. Regardless, both of them were staring at me now. Grayson broke eye contact first. "You may as well tell me what you think that letter means, Jamie." "And why," Jameson said through gritted teeth, "would I give away the game like that?" They were used to competing with each other, to pushing to the finish line. I couldn't shake the feeling that it didn't belong here, between them, at all. "You do realize, Jamie, that I'm capable of staying here with the two of you in this room indefinitely," Grayson said. "As soon as I see what you're up to, you know I'll reason it out. I was raised to play, same as you." Jameson stared hard at his brother, then smiled. "It's up to the interloper of dubious intentions." His smile turned to a smirk. "He expects me to send Grayson packing. I probably should have, but it was entirely possible we were wasting our time here, and I had no particular objection to wasting Grayson Hawthorne's time. He can stay. You could have cut the tension in the room with a knife." "All right, Eris." Jameson flashed me another wild smile. "As you wish." Chapter 33. I'd known that things would go faster with a second set of hands, but I hadn't anticipated what it would feel like to be shut in the room with two Hawthornes, particularly these two. As we worked, Grayson behind me and Jameson above, I wondered if they'd always been like oil and water, if Grayson had always taken himself too seriously, if Jameson had always made a game of taking nothing seriously at all. I wondered if the two of them had grown up slotted into the roles of heir and spare, once Nash had made it clear that he would abdicate the Hawthorne throne. I wondered if they'd gotten along before Emily. There's nothing here. Grayson punctuated that statement by placing a book on the shelf a little too hard. Coincidentally, Jameson commented up above, you also don't have to be here. If she's here, I'm here. Avery doesn't bite. For once, Jameson referred to me by my actual name. Frankly, now that the issue of relatedness has been settled in the negative, I'd be game if she did. I choked on my own spit and seriously considered throttling him. He was baiting Grayson, and using me to do it. Jamie? Grayson sounded almost too calm. Shut up and keep looking. I did exactly that. Book off, cover on, book reshelved. The hours ticked by. Grayson and I worked our way toward each other. When he was close enough that I could see him out of the corner of my eye, he spoke, his voice barely audible to me, and not audible to Jameson at all. My brother's grieving for our grandfather. Surely you can understand that. I could, and I did. I said nothing. He's a sensation seeker. Pain, fear, joy, it doesn't matter. Grayson had my full attention now, and he knew it. He's hurting, and he needs the rush of the game. He needs for this to mean something. This is in his grandfather's letter, the will, me? And you don't think it does, I said, keeping my own voice low. Grayson didn't think I was special, didn't believe this was the kind of puzzle worth solving. I don't think that you have to be the villain of the story to be a threat to the family. If I hadn't already met Nash, I would have pegged Grayson as the oldest brother. You keep talking about the rest of the family, I said, but this isn't just about them. I'm a threat to you. I disinherited his fortune. I was living at his house. His grandfather had chosen me. Grayson was right beside me now. I am not threatened. He wasn't imposing physically. I'd never seen him lose control, but the closer he came to me, the more my body threw itself into high alert. Eris? I startled when Jameson spoke. Reflexively, I stepped away from his brother. Yes? I think I found something. I pushed past Grayson to make my way up the stairs. Jameson had found something. A book that doesn't match its cover. That was an assumption on my part, but the instant I hit the second story and saw the smile on Jameson's lips, I knew that I was right. He held up a hardcover book. I read the title, Sail Away, and on the inside, Jameson was a showman at heart. He removed the cover with a flourish and tossed me the book. The Tragical History of Dr. Faustus. Faust, I said. The devil you know, James replied, or the devil you don't. It could have been a coincidence. We could have been reading meaning where there was none, like people trying to intuit the future from the shape of clouds. But that didn't stop the hairs on my neck from rising. Didn't stop my heart from racing. Everything is something in the Hawthorne house. That thought beat in my pulse as I opened up the copy of Faust in my hands. There, taped to the inside cover, was a translucent red square. Jameson, I jerked my eyes up from the book. There's something here. Grayson must have been listening to us down below, but he said nothing. Jameson was beside me in an instant. He brought his fingers to the red square. It was thin, made of some plastic film, maybe 4 inches long on each side. What is this? I asked. Jameson took the book gingerly from my hands and carefully removed the square from the book. He held it up to the light. Filter paper. That came from down below. Grayson stood in the center of the room looking up at us. A favorite of her grandfather's, particularly useful for revealing hidden messages. I don't suppose the text of that book is written in red. I flipped to the first page. Black ink, I said. I kept flipping. The color of the ink never changed, but a few pages in, I found a word that had been circled in pencil. A rush of adrenaline shot through my veins. Did your grandfather have a habit of writing in books? In a first edition of Faust? Jameson snorted. I had no idea how much money this book was worth, or how much of its value had been squandered with that one little circle on the page, but I knew in my bones that we were onto something. Where? I read the word out loud. Neither brother provided any commentary, so I flipped another page and then another. It was 50 or more before I hit another circled word. A. I kept turning the pages. The circled words were coming quicker now, sometimes in pairs. There is. Jameson grabbed a pen off a nearby shelf. He didn't have any paper, so he started writing the words on the back of his left hand. Keep going. I did. A again, I said. There is again. I was almost to the end of the book. Way, I said finally. I turned the pages more slowly now. Nothing, nothing, nothing. Finally, I looked up. That's it. I closed the book. Jameson held his hand up in front of his body, and I stepped closer to get a better look. I brought my hands to his, revealing the words he'd written there. Where, there is, way, there is, way. What are we supposed to do with this? Change the order of the words? I asked. It was a common enough type of word puzzle. Jameson's eyes lit up. Where there is I picked up where he left off. There is a way. Jameson's lips curved upward. We're missing a word, he murmured. Will, another proverb. Where there's a will, there's a way. He flicked the red tape in his hand back and forth as he thought out loud. When you look through a colored filter, lines of that color disappear. It's one way of writing hidden messages. You layer the text in different colors. The book is written in black ink, so the tape isn't meant to be used on the book. Jameson was talking faster now, the energy in his voice contagious. Grayson spoke up from the room's epicenter, hence the message in the book directing us where to make use of the film. They were used to playing their grandfather's games. They'd been trained to from the time they were young. I hadn't, but their back and forth had given me just enough to connect the dots. The filter paper was meant to reveal secret writing, but not in the book. Instead, the book, like the letter before it, contained a clue. In this case, a phrase with a single missing word. Where there's a will, there's a way. What do you think the chances are, I said slowly, turning the puzzle over in my mind, that somewhere there's a copy of your grandfather's will written in red ink? Chapter 34. I asked Alyssa about the will. I half expected her to look at me like I'd lost my marbles, but the second I said the word red, her expression shifted. She informed me that a viewing of the red will could be arranged, but first I had to do something for her. That something ended up involving a brother-sister stylist team carting what appeared to be the entire inventory of Saks Fifth Avenue into my bedroom. The female stylist was tiny and said next to nothing. The man was 6'6" and kept a steady stream of observations. You can't wear yellow, and I would encourage you to banish the words orange and cream from your vocabulary, but almost every other color is an option. The three of us were in my room now, along with Libby, 13 racks of clothing, dozens of trays of jewelry, and what appeared to be an entire salon set up in the bathroom. Brights, pastels, earth tones in moderation. You gravitate towards solids? I looked down at my current outfit. A gray t-shirt and my second most comfortable pair of jeans. I like simple. Simple is a lie, the woman murmured, but a beautiful one sometimes. Beside me, Libby snorted and bit back a grin. I glared at her. You're enjoying this, aren't you? I asked darkly. Then I took in the outfit she was wearing. The dress was black, which was Libby enough, but the style would have fit right in at a country club. I told Alyssa not to pressure her. You don't have to change how I started to say, but Libby cut me off. They bribed me. With boots. She gestured toward the back wall, which was lined with boots, all of them leather, in shades of purple, black, and blue. Ankle length, calf length, even one pair of thigh highs. Also, Libby added certainly, creepy lockets. If a piece of jewelry looked like it might be haunted, Libby was there. You let them make you over in exchange for 15 pairs of boots and some creepy lockets? I said, feeling mildly betrayed. And some incredibly soft leather pants, Libby added. Totally worth it. I'm still me, just fancy. Her hair was still blue, her nail polish was still black, and she wasn't the one the styling team was focused on now. We should start with the hair, the male stylist declared beside me, eyeing my offending tresses. Don't you think? He asked his sister. There was no reply as the woman disappeared behind one of the racks. I could hear her rumbling through another, rearranging the order of the clothing. Thick, not quite wavy, not quite straight. You could go either way. The giant man looked and sounded like he should be playing tight end, not advising me on hairstyles. No shorter than 2 inches below your chin, no longer than mid-back. Gentle layers wouldn't hurt. He glanced over at Libby. I suggest you disown her if she opts for bangs. I'll take that under consideration, Libby said solemnly. You'd be miserable if it wasn't long enough for a ponytail, she told me. Um, Ponytail. That got me a censuring look from the linebacker. Do you hate your hair and want it to suffer? I don't hate it, I shrugged. I just don't care. That is also a lie. The woman reappeared from behind the clothing rack. She had half a dozen hangers worth of clothes in her hands, and as I watched, she hung them up, face out, on the closet rack. The result was 3 different outfits. Classic. She nodded to an ice blue skirt, paired with a long-sleeve t-shirt. Natural. The stylist moved on to the second option, a loose and flowing floral dress combining at least a dozen shades of red and pink. Preppy with an edge. The final option included a brown leather skirt, shorter than any of the others, and probably tighter too. She matched it with a white-collared shirt and a gray cardigan. Which calls to you? The male stylist asked. That got another snort out of Libby. She was definitely enjoying this way too much. They're all fine. I eyed the floral dress. That one looks like it might be itchy. The stylist seemed to be developing a migraine. Casual options? He asked his sister, pained. She disappeared and reappeared with 3 more outfits, which he added to the first 3. Black leggings, a red blouse, and her knee-length white cardigan paired with the classic combo. A lacy sea green shirt and darker green pants joined the floral monstrosity, and an oversized cashmere sweater and torn jeans were hung beside the leather skirt. Classic, natural, preppy with an edge. The woman reiterated my options. I have philosophical objections to colored pants, I said. So that one's out. Don't just look at the clothes, the man instructed, taking the look. Rolling my eyes at someone twice my size probably wasn't the wisest course of action. The female stylist crossed to me. She walked lightly on her feet, like she could tiptoe across a bed of flowers without breaking a single one. The way you dress, the way you do your hair, it's not silly, it's not shallow. This, she gestured to the rack behind her, it's not just clothing, it's a message. You're not deciding what to wear, you're deciding what story you want your image to tell. Are you young and sweet? Do you dress to this world of wealth and wonders like you were born into it? Or do you want to walk the line? The same but different, young but full of steel. Why do I have to tell a story? I asked. Because if you don't tell a story, someone else will tell it for you. I turned to see Xander Hawthorne standing in the doorway, holding a plate of scones. Makeovers, he told me, like the recreational building of Rube Goldberg machines, are hungry work. I wanted to narrow my eyes, but Xander and his scones were glare-proof. What do you know about makeovers? I grumbled. If I were a guy, there'd be 2 racks of clothes on this room, max. And if I were white, Xander returned loftily, people wouldn't look at me like I'm half a Hawthorne. Scone? That took the wind out of my sails. It was ridiculous of me to think that Xander didn't know what it was like to be judged, or to have to play life by different rules. I wondered suddenly what it was like for him growing up in this house, growing up Hawthorne. Can I have one of the blueberry scones? I asked, my version of a peace offering. Xander handed me a lemon scone. Let's not get ahead of ourselves. With only a moderate amount of teeth gnashing, I ended up picking option 3. I hated the word preppy almost as much as I disliked any claims to having an edge, but at the end of the day, I couldn't pretend to be wide-eyed and innocent, and I deeply suspected that any attempts to act like this world was a natural fit would itch. Not physically, but under my skin. The team kept my hair long, but worked in layers and cajoled it into a bedhead wave. I'd expected them to suggest highlights, but they gone the opposite routes. Subtle streaks a shade darker and richer than my normal ash brown. They cleaned my eyebrows up, but left them thick. I was instructed on the finer points of an elaborate facial regimen and found myself on the receiving end of a spray tan via airbrush, but they kept my makeup minimal. Eyes and lips, nothing more. Looking at myself in the mirror, I could almost believe that the girl staring back belonged in this house. What do you think? I asked, turning to Libby. She was standing near the window, backlit. Her hand was clutching her phone, her eyes glued to the screen. Lib? She looked up and gave me a deer-in-headlights look that I recognized all too well. Drake. He was texting her. Was she texting back? You look great. Libby sounded sincere, because she was always sincere. Sincere and earnest and way, way too optimistic. He hit her, I told myself. He sold us out. She won't take him back. You look fantastic, Xander said grandly. You also don't look like someone who might have seduced an old man out of billions, so that's good. Really, Alexander? Zara announced her presence, next with next to no fanfare. No one believes that Avery seduced your grandfather. Her story, her image, was somewhat between oozing class and no nonsense. But I'd seen her press conference. I knew that while she might care about her father's reputation, she didn't have any particular attachment to mine. The worse I looked, the better for her. Unless the game has changed. Avery. Zara gave me a smile as cool as the winter colors she wore. Might I have a word? Chapter 35. Zara didn't speak immediately once the two of us were alone. I decided that if she wasn't going to break the silence, I would. You talked to the lawyers. That was the obvious explanation for why she was here. I did. Zara offered no apologies. And now I'm talking to you. I'm sure you can forgive me for not doing so sooner. As you can imagine, this has all come out as a bit of a shock. A bit? I snorted and cut through my niceties. You had a press conference strongly suggesting that your father was senile and that I'm under investigation by the authorities for elder abuse. Zara perched at the end of an antique desk, one of the few surfaces in the room not covered with accessories or clothes. Yes, well, you can thank your legal team for not making certain realities apparent sooner. If I get nothing, you get nothing. I wasn't going to let her come in here and dance around the truth. You look nice. Zara changed the subject and eyed my new outfit. Not what I would have chosen for you, but you're presentable. Presentable, with an edge. Thanks, I grunted. You can thank me once I've done what I can to ease you through this transition. I wasn't naive enough to believe that she had a sudden change of heart. If she despised me before, she despised me now. The difference was that now she needed something. I figured that if I waited long enough, she'd tell me exactly what the something was. I'm not sure how much Elisa has told you, but in addition to my father's personal assets, you have also inherited control of the family's foundation. Zara took measures of my expression before continuing. It is one of the largest private charitable It's one of the largest private charitable foundations in the country. We give away upward of $100 million a year. $100 million. I was never going to get used to this. Numbers like that were never going to seem real. Every year? I asked, stunned. Zara smiled placidly. Compound interest is a lovely thing. $100 million a year in interest. And she was just talking about the foundation, not Tobias Hawthorne's personal fortune. For the first time, I actually ran the math in my head. Even if taxes took half of the estate and I only averaged a 4% yield, I'd still be making nearly $1 billion a year. Doing nothing. That was just wrong. Who does the foundation give its money to? I asked quietly. Zara pushed off the desk and began pacing the length of the room. The Hawthorne Foundation invests in children and families, health initiatives, scientific advancement, community building, and the arts. Under those headings, you could support nearly anything. I could support nearly anything. I could change the world. I've spent my entire adult life running the foundation. Zara's lips pulled tight across her teeth. There are organizations that rely on our support. If you intend to exert yourself, there's a right way and a wrong way to do that. She stopped right in front of me. You need me, Avery. As much as I like to wash my hands of all of this, I've worked too long and too hard to see that work undone. I listened to what she was saying, and what she wasn't. Does the foundation pay you? I asked. I ticked off the seconds until her reply. I draw a salary with the skills I bring. As satisfying as it would have been to tell her that her services would no longer be needed, I wasn't that impulsive, and I wasn't cruel. I want to be involved, I told her, and not just for show. I want to make decisions. Homelessness, poverty, domestic violence, access to preventative care. What could I do with $100 million a year? You're young enough, Zara said, her voice almost wistful, to believe that money solves all ills. Spoken like a rich person, so rich she couldn't imagine the weight of problems money can solve. If you're serious about taking a role at the foundation, Zara sounded like she was enjoying saying that about as much as she would have enjoyed dumpster diving or a root canal. I can teach you what you need to know. Monday, after school, at the foundation. She issued each part of that order as its own separate sentence. The door opened before I could ask her where exactly the foundation was. Orrin took up position beside me. The women will come after you in the courtroom, he told me. But now Zara knew that she couldn't come after me legally, and my head of security didn't want me in this room with her alone. Chapter 36. The next day, Sunday, Orrin drove me to Ortega, McNamara, and Jones to see the Red Will. Avery, Elisa met Orrin and me in the firm's lobby. The place was modern, minimalist, and full of chrome. The building looked big enough to host 100 lawyers, but as Elisa walked past a receptionist and a security guard to an elevator bank, I didn't see another soul. You said I was the firm's only client, I commented as the elevator began to climb. Exactly how big is the firm? There are a few different divisions, Elisa replied crisply. Mr. Hawthorne's assets were quite diversified. That requires a diverse array of lawyers. And the will I asked about, it's here? My pocket held a gift from Jameson, the square of red film we discovered taped to the inside cover of Faust. I told him that I was coming here, and he'd handed it over, no questions asked, like he trusted me more than he trusted any of his brothers. The red will is here, Elisa confirmed. She turned to Orrin. How much company do we have today? She asked. By company, she meant paparazzi. And by we, she meant me. It's tapered off a little, Orrin reported, but odds are good that they'll be piled outside the door by the time we leave. If we ended the day without at least one headline that said something along the lines of world's richest teenager lawyers up, I'd eat a pair of Libby's new boots. On the third floor, we passed through another security checkpoint, and then, finally, Elise led me to a corner office. The room was furnished but otherwise empty, with one exception. Sitting in the middle of a heavy mahogany desk was the will. By the time I saw it, Orrin had taken a position outside the door. Elisa made no move to follow me when I approached the desk. As I got closer, the type jumped out at me. Read. My father was instructed to keep this copy here and show it to you or the boys if one of you came looking, Lisa said. I looked back at her. Instructed, I repeated. By Tobias Hawthorne? Naturally. Did you tell Nash? I asked. A cool mask settled over her face. I don't tell Nash anything anymore. She gave me her most austere look. If that's all, I'll leave you to it. Elisa had never even asked what it was. I waited until I heard the door close behind her before I went to sit at the desk. I retrieved the phone from my pocket. Sorry. Where there's a will, I murmured, laying the square flat on the will's first page. There's a way. I moved the red film over the paper and the words beneath it disappeared. It worked exactly as Jameson and Grayson had described. If the entire will was written in red, all this was going to do was make everything disappear. But if layered underneath the red text there was another color, then anything written in that word would remain visible. I made it past Tobias Hawthorne's initial bequest to the Laughlins, to Orrin, to his mother-in-law. Nothing. I got to the bit about Zara and Sky, and as I skimmed the red film over the words, they disappeared. I glanced down at the next sentence. To my grandsons, Nash Westbrook Hawthorne, Grayson Davenport Hawthorne, Jameson Winchester Hawthorne, and Alexander Blackwood Hawthorne. As I ran the film over the page, the words disappeared, but not all of them. 4 remained. Westbrook, Davenport, Winchester, Blackwood. For the first time, I thought about the fact that all 4 of Sky's sons bore her last name, their grandfather's last name, Hawthorne. Each of the boys' middle names was also a surname. Their father's last names, I wondered? As my brain wrapped itself around that, I made my way through the rest of the document. Part of me expected to see something when I hit my own name, but it disappeared, just like the rest of the text. Everything except for the Hawthorne grandsons' middle names. Westbrook, Winchester, Davenport, Blackwood. I said them out loud, committed them to memory. And then I texted Jameson, and wondered if he would text Grayson. Chapter 37. Whoa there, kid. Where's the fire? I was back at Hawthorne House and headed to meet Jameson when another Hawthorne brother stopped me in my tracks. Nash. Avery just came from reading a special copy of the will, Elisa said behind me. So much for her not telling her ex anything anymore. A special copy of the will. Nash slid his gaze to me. Would I be correct in assuming that this has something to do with the gobbledygook in my letter from the old man? Your letter, I repeated, my brain worried. It shouldn't have come as a surprise. Tobias Hawthorne had left Grayson and Jameson with identical clues. Nash, too, and probably Xander. Don't worry, Nash drawled. I'm sitting this one out. I told you, I don't want the money. The money is not at stake here, Elisa said firmly. The will is ironclad, Nash finished for her. I believe I've heard that a time or two. Elisa's eyes narrowed. You were never very good at listening. Listen doesn't always mean agree, Lily. Nash's use of the nickname, his amiable smile and equally amiable tone, sucked every ounce of oxygen out of the room. I should go, Elisa turned, whipped fast to me. If you need anything, call, I finished, wondering just how high my eyebrows had risen at their exchange. When Elisa closed the front door behind her, she slammed it. You gonna tell me where you're headed in such a hurry? Nash asked me again once she was gone. Jameson asked me to meet him in the solarium. Nash cocked an eyebrow at me. I don't even know what. Wait, got any idea what the solarium is? I realized belatedly that I didn't. I don't even know what a solarium is, I admitted. Solariums are overrated. Nash shrugged and gave me an assessing look. Tell me, kid, what do you usually do on your birthday? That came out of nowhere. I felt like it had to be a trick question, but I answered anyway. Eat cake? Every year on our birthdays, Nash stared off into the distance. The old man would call us into his study and say the same 3 words. Invest, cultivate, create. He gave us $10,000 to invest. Can you imagine letting an 8-year-old choose stocks? Nash snorted. Then we got to pick a talent or interest to cultivate for the year. A language, a hobby, an art, a sport. No expenses were spared. If you picked piano, a grand piano showed up the next day. Private lessons started immediately, and by midway through the year, you'd be backstage at Carnegie Hall, getting tips from the greats. That's amazing, I said, thinking about all the trophies I'd seen in Tobias Hawthorne's office. Nash didn't exactly look amazed. The old man also laid out a challenge every year, he continued, his voice hardening. An assignment. Something we were expected to create by the next birthday. An invention, a solution, a work of museum-quality art. Something. I thought about all the comic books I'd seen framed on the wall. That doesn't sound horrible. It doesn't, does it? Nash said, ruminating on those words. Come on. He jerked his head toward a nearby corridor. I'll show you to the solarium. He started walking, and I had to jog to keep up. Did Jameson tell you about the old man's weekly riddles? Nash asked as we walked. Yeah, I said, he did. Sometimes, Nash told me, at the beginning of the game, the old man would lay out a collection of objects. A fishing hook, a price tag, a glass ballerina, a knife. He shook his head in memory. And by the time the puzzle was solved, damned if we hadn't used all 4. He smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. I was so much older. I had an advantage. Jamie and Gray, they'd team up against me, then double-cross each other right at the end. Why are you telling me this? I asked as their pace finally slowed to a nearby standstill. Why tell me any of this? About their birthdays, the presents, the expectations? Nash didn't answer right away. Instead, he nodded down a nearby hall. Solarium's the last door on the right. Thanks, I said. I walked toward the door Nash had indicated, and right before I reached my destination, he spoke up behind me. You might think you're playing the game, darling, but that's not how Jamie sees it. Nash's voice was gentle enough, but for the words. We aren't normal. This place isn't normal, and you're not a player, kid. You're the glass ballerina. Or the knife.